Can a 40-year-old pilot reinvent himself in just 24 hours and move from an uncontrollable car to an epic comeback? What Hamilton did in Spa was not magic. It was something much more revealing. Are you ready to know the real secret behind your resurrection in Belgium? From the first moment on track, telemetry data showed alarming inconsistencies. The SF-25 did not respond linearly to the pilot's entries, and the thermal degradation of the rear train was disproportionate. The car was not only unpredictable, but it seemed to be fighting itself. To this was added an even more complex problem: weather conditions. The Spa-Francorchamps track, already one of the most demanding paths of the calendar, presented wet areas intermittent by a light rain that never finished settling. This phenomenon amplified all the structural defects of the car, especially those linked to its already reduced operational window. During the sprint classification, the SF-25 showed its worst face. Hamilton, accustomed to cars that communicate every millimeter of grip, described his Ferrari as completely disconnected from the ground. His spinning spot was not a calculation mistake or excessive aggressiveness. It was a chain reaction to a total loss of adhesion caused by a combination of desynchronization in the brake system and a gearbox that, according to its engineers, was responding with irregular delays. The hybrid unit failed to harmonize with the regenerative braking or with the traction when leaving curve. The result was an erratic behavior that neither the best pilot in the world could anticipate. The cameras captured engineers discussing calibration maps that did not match what the sensors said. The technical team not only had to review basic mechanical configurations, but to reenact the entire installation protocol of new parts, because there was suspicion that one of the components of the hydraulic system had been mounted with incorrect tolerance. And while all this happened, the clock was still running. Spa does not forgive. But beyond the technical aspects, what happened that Friday was a psychological blow. Lewis Hamilton, 7-time world champion, was forced to publicly recognize that for the first time in his career he did not know how to correct the car. When he said, "Something like that had never happened to me," he did not refer only to the spin but to the feeling of not having control, of being driving blindly. Saturday's day at Spa-Francorchamps was not a simple continuation of Friday's disaster. It was an emotional and technical minefield where every decision had the weight of a championship, and each error could translate into a new collapse for Ferrari and Hamilton. After a marathon night in the garage, the team opted for a drastic solution: change the entire car configuration. This meant starting from the pit lane on Sunday, but on Saturday it became a crucial day to rewrite the destination of the weekend. The first thing to understand is that Ferrari SF-25 is not a common car. Its aerodynamic behavior is designed to operate within almost obsessive margins. The redesigned rear suspension, which in theory should provide stability, revealed an unplanned side effect: a huge dependence on the electronic mapping of torque and braking. Any mismatch in these systems not only altered balance, but completely broke the harmony between the rear axle and the rest of the car. That night, the technical team detected that the original setup was amplifying the delay in the delivery of the engine when leaving the slow curves, which generated unexpected microblocks and spontaneous traction losses. Telemetry showed inconsistencies between what Hamilton asked with his right foot and what the car delivered, especially in low-load conditions such as Spa. It was then that a key decision was made: to free Hamilton from the pre-configured restrictions and allow him to completely customize his torque maps, regenerative braking and brake balance. This marked a before and after. For the first time in the season, Hamilton had the possibility of sculpting the behavior of the car according to his pilot style, not vice versa. And this is not a minor issue. For more than a decade, in Mercedes, Lewis had worked with a technical architecture that he understood and responded predictably. The SF-25, on the other hand, spoke in another language. And that night, the team began to teach the translations. The decision to change from the ground the braking distribution system, a component that normally adjusts for software for weeks of analysis, was a radical bet. Ferrari partially reprogrammed the brake-by-wire system, also adjusting the behavior of the ERS to avoid transfers of erratic that caused destabilization in combined braking phases. This represented a philosophical change. Ferrari no longer tried to adapt to SF-25. I was adapting the SF-25 to Hamilton. And while all this happened, on Saturday he kept running. Spa, in its unpredictable climate, began to show rain signals for Sunday. The preparation window became even narrower. Hamilton, meanwhile, locked himself in the improvised simulation room at the back of the paddock. He spent hours reviewing onboard camera, not only his, but also rivals like Norris and Leclerc. I watched not how the curves attacked, but how the car reacted to minimal corrections. He did not seek to copy, he sought to understand how his SF-25 could have that kind of progressive and controlled reaction. Sunday dawned with a dense atmosphere. The type of tension that is only perceived when something important is about to happen. The sky on Spa-Francorchamps was not completely gray, but it didn't offer certainties either. The predictions spoke of scattered rains, perhaps intermittent, which placed all the strategists in total alert mode. But in the Ferrari box, that weather instability was received almost with relief, because for the first time throughout the weekend, the environment played in favor of chaos. And for Hamilton, chaos meant opportunity. Lewis left from the pit lane, a sentence that, for many, meant a limited damage race. But for him, he represented freedom. I had no immediate traffic. He could heat tires at his pace. And above all, he could execute an alternative career plan, away from the strategic rigidities that usually impose himself from the first rows. The key was one: real-time reading. The rain began shy, like a whisper. But in Spa, that is enough to change everything. While several teams chose to extend their initial steins waiting for a stronger downpour that ever arrived, Ferrari was one of the first to react and execute the first great strategic decision of the day, an aggressive undercut that coincided with the exact moment in which the track began to dry enough for intermediate tires. Hamilton emerged from that first cycle of stops not only in clean air, but with a race rhythm that even surprised its engineers. The new torque delivery map, rescheduled the night before, allowed him to dose the power with surgical precision when leaving slow curves, where before the car skated violently. In addition, the adjustment in the brake-by-wire had eliminated the microblocks that so much committed their entrance to curve during the rest of the weekend. For the first time, the SF-25 reacted with progressivity. It was a predictable car, domable, ready to be pushed to the limit. And that was what he did. Hamilton began chaining surgical overtaking, one after another. They were not spectacular maneuvers due to their aggressiveness, but for cleaning. What really surprised was how he executed each step with a perfect reading of the available grip. While other pilots struggled to stay in line with the wet asphalt, Hamilton piloted as if they knew each exact point in advance where the grip was lost. His Trace de Eau Rouge, barely modified with respect to the dry line, revealed total confidence. Under normal conditions, that would be reckless. In his case, it was a statement of absolute control. But the most symbolic moment of the day arrived last half of the race, when Hamilton beat two cars in a single round. First inside in them combs, then outside in blanchiment. A double surpass that not only showed rhythm but psychological domain. At that point, Ferrari engineers no longer instructed him. They only updated the distance with the following objective. The relationship between team and pilot had invested. Now it was the car that followed Hamilton. The comeback took him to the 7th position, but the number itself did not tell the whole story. What mattered was the type of career he had done. It was not a simple position recovery. It was an integral demonstration that the car power symbiosis, long postponed since its arrival in Maranello, finally began to consolidate. What days ago seemed an insurmountable technical breakdown, it was transformed before the eyes of the paddock into a potentially lethal alliance. When the checkered flag drops, the image was not of noisy celebration. It was of respect. Among the engineers. Even among the most skeptical analysts. Because what Hamilton did in Spa was not simply to add points. He was redrawing his narrative in Ferrari. It was demonstrating that, even in the fall of his career, he still has the ability to reinvent himself. And that, in Formula One, is the most difficult of all. When the checkered flag fell in Spa-Francorchamps, what we saw was not only the end of a race. It was the closure of a dense, technical, emotional chapter, full of questions that until Saturday seemed to have no answer. And at the same time, it was the beginning of something new. Something that very few anticipated. Hamilton did not win the race. But he won something infinitely more powerful. The internal trust of his team, the external validation of his rivals, and, above all, a personal conviction that had not been seen since his years of dominance. The SF-25, a temperamental, unpredictable car and until then incompatible with its style, finally began to speak its language. The pieces fit. Not by accident. Not luckily. But because Ferrari, on the verge of technical collapse, decided to listen. And because Hamilton, instead of resisting change, chose to rebuild from scratch. That convergence not only saved the weekend. He planted the basis of a long-term transformation that could completely alter the course of the championship. Because if something taught us this race, it is that the success in Formula One is not always wrapped in victories. Sometimes, it is built in silence at the bottom of the platoon, in decisions that are not seen in the timetable, but that change everything. And Spa 2025 can be exactly that. The moment when Hamilton's myth stopped looking towards the past and began writing his future in red. So now I throw the question to you. Do you think this performance was just an exception fed by rain and chaos? Or are you convinced, like some inside the paddock already murmur, that this is the real beginning of the Hamilton-Ferrari era? Or they are already very far to compete? Leave it to the comments.